So here is the prompt for our fourth paper, um, the documented persuasive essay, it's called. And just to briefly unpack that a little bit, the documented part of it, this is going to refer to the format or style guide that you decide to use, whether MLA or APA or another one, if your discipline or major or just preferences call for it. But do let me know what that one is so we can be on the same, well, page. And, many of you are seem to still be finding it challenging to do basic formatting, line spacing, margins, headings, paragraph indents, setting up your works cited or references pages. These are all things that I'm going to be paying more attention to for this fourth paper. So you do stand to lose some ground if if you don't make, for example, any attempt at adhering to the requirements of any formatting or style guide. So please do. We'll talk about it more in a minute, but in addition to general formatting, um, we're also going to be working with over the next few weeks and paying closer attention to things like incorporating source material through quotations or paraphrasing, what have you. So all of these considerations are what we mean when we say documented. Persuasive essay, that's just overarching. The point of this paper in a broad way is to be persuasive. Just like we've done countless times now throughout the semester, we're going to identify a topic or an issue within a topic that means something to us, that's important for one reason or another, that has you know, different points of view, a variety of points of view. We are going to find or identify which stance is ours and proceed in that direction. We're going to proceed in analyzing and discussing, analyzing, evaluate, discussing texts, all for the sake of saying basically, look here, this is a topic that's important to me. Other people think differently. I've got these couple of sources as examples. Um, Here's what these sources are doing, here's what they mean, and here's why and how they relate to my point or my stance. And because of all that, I think I'm right. That's what you're essentially doing in this paper. So try not to think of it as you're just reporting what's going on with some sources. With every line that you write, with every, you know, for example, rhetorical element or feature you identify and analyze, you're going to try to be doing it with a mind to convincing your reader that your point of view is the right point of view. Let's just read a little bit here. The final major writing assignment will build on techniques and strategies you have developed throughout the semester while crafting the summary and critical or strong response or speaking back paper, as well as the visual rhetorical analysis paper. So this fourth paper is going to build on, it's going to extend what we've already been doing in the second or third papers. Um, you'll be making a lot of familiar moves here in this fourth paper, whether it's writing summary or including your own insights, opinions, experiences, um, as well as conducting rhetorical analysis, whether of visuals or of written texts, with plenty of why and how um, discussion. That be that may be a little bit premature because I haven't graded our third papers yet. So you'll probably this will become clearer once you receive comments and feedback on your third papers. And we're also going to be focusing on a new sort of way of writing or a genre of writing called synthesis. Um, What we've been practicing so far is just writing about or writing to a single source at a time so far. And what I'm going to be wanting us to do here, and we'll practice it a little, over the next few weeks, is I want to evolve that now. I want you to begin to think of your source material, think of the discourse a source associated with your source material as something like a conversation. And so there's going to be a back and forth, a give and take. You're going to try and find where you fit in among these sources, especially the ones you end up choosing. And you're going to put them into conversation with each other, put them into touch with each other. What does each one of them bring? How do they relate to each other? How do they relate to your broad topic or issue? How do they relate to your stance? These are all ways of beginning to think about this idea of synthesis. And so instead of just reporting straight up, here's what this source says, and then on to the next one, here's what this source says, we're going to bring them together a little bit more. We talked about the formatting and the documented part of this assignment, having to do with formatting or style guides, aka MLA, APA, etc. Um, so please be mindful of that too. I really don't want to have to mark people down for, formatting or style troubles. This is something I need to evaluate you on though. So if you're unsure, you can always talk to me about it. I have tons of office hours. Your textbook goes on and on about it. We have a writing center. There are ways to get up to speed on this. So please try not to neglect it. The overarching main point of this fourth paper will be to persuade or convince your reader that your stance on a topic or issue, or just the overall main point of your paper is the right one or the correct one. This is also a form of argumentation, so you can think of this paper as an argument paper. Um, but don't try not to get bound up in this idea. We're not necessarily studying this yet. You're just going to be putting forth your best point of view, and I'm going to show you some ways over the next few weeks to help make it persuasive and convincing. Um, so this was just like to help get us situated with what we're going to be doing here in the fourth paper. Here's a little bit more specific. For this essay, you're going to come to terms with at least two texts. They can be written text, visuals, one of each, however you want to. I want you to again identify a topic or an issue associated with something you think is important in our society or in our culture. You're going to distill, you're going to figure out what the main point of each of your sources are, what the messages are, what the arguments are, sort of like we did with the third paper, or we're doing with the third paper. Um, all of this will help shed light on this idea here, rhetorical purpose. We've talked about this at length now a number of times, but just to briefly remind us, rhetorical purpose, if you pick a topic, if your topic is climate change, for example, and you choose a couple of sources, one that is very much, an advocate um, for climate change action, to take action to mitigate the effects of climate change. Um, and you have one that, is claims climate change is some kind of hoax or whatever. The rhetorical purpose behind these is a little bit different than what you perceive is perhaps their main message or argument. You can pick out their main message or their argument. You know, we need to lower our carbon footprints and, um, become vegetarians or whatever it happens to be in support of, preventing climate change versus, oh, I don't see enough evidence or I believe it's a bunch of conspiracy. Whatever the main points of your sources in this example of climate change happen to be, is a little bit different from rhetorical purpose. Rhetorical purpose has to do, what do you think the intended effect on the audience or audiences is? with whatever sources you choose. Is it a call to action? Is it to convince or persuade the audience to adopt a certain point of view or philosophy or um, say certain words or enact certain behaviors? This is a little bit different than what is the main point or what is the argument. And you need to know this. You need to. I'm not going to grade you on whether you're right or wrong. I want you to identify what you think the rhetorical purpose is, and that's what you're going to write about largely in the body of the paper. How effective is your source at accomplishing whatever you think their purpose is? And you elaborate that and expand on that idea through your rhetorical analysis. And once again, you identify several rhetorical elements or features inherent to your sources in order to substantiate what you think that rhetorical purpose is and whether or not you think it's effective. Things like that. That's what we're doing here. Not exclusively, but in large part with this fourth paper. It's part of it. So to that end, what are we going to be doing exactly? Um, Summarizing. I want you to summarize your sources like we've been practicing. Summaries, it's an important genre of writing in its own right. Um, I want you to take many opportunities, not just in separate paragraphs isolated by themselves. As you're composing your body paragraphs, find moments where you can critically respond or speak back in that personal voice that we've been practicing all semester. Don't make your whole paragraph about this. That would be a mistake. You don't want to leave out rhetorical analysis or synthesis. We'll get to that in a minute. But have this be a part of your writing as you take on your sources, as you identify elements in your sources. If you don't see an angle to do this, that's okay. You don't have to do this for every single point you find in your paper, but try to find many opportunities to include and express your voice. It's very important. Um, Illuminating and elaborating connections between your texts. We mentioned that a minute ago. These connections by way of rhetorical analysis, or as you're composing your rhetorical analysis, say, hey, this is a lot similar strategy to what was going on with my other source, and um, but they're doing it for different reasons, and here's why that's significant. Making connections like that. This is when you begin to get into this idea of synthesis. So keep that in mind. We're not strictly just in isolation, in a vacuum, breaking down texts just for the sport of it. We're trying to demonstrate to our reader we understand what these texts are doing individually, what they're doing, for example, in opposition to one another, and what that means to the discourse or to this conversation that's supposed to be going on associated with your topic or issue. This is just, I'm summarizing here, recapping um, everything I just said, if you need to read it another way. Um, in our textbook, there are a number of places where it talks about synthesis. We'll get to some of them over the next few weeks. If you want to, you can, search around in the textbook. Of course, there's always search engines, things like that. Um, this idea of synthesis, it's a little bit challenging to grasp at first, but um, once you start to grab onto it, and hopefully we'll do that sooner rather than later, because I want to practice this a lot before this paper's due, obviously. We're going to be again establishing and finding those connections between our sources, our topics, our own points of view. But why? So it's all for the sake of um, sort of discovering sometimes, or if we've already discovered it, maybe refining our point of view. The whatever points of view we have, again, I'm never going to grade you on those, but um, how you got there, what your thinking behind it is. That's what I'm encouraging. That's what I'm going to provide you comments and feedback on. So have whatever stance you're going to have. What I want to see in this fourth paper from you is how that stance is informed by the work that you do with your sources. when you summarize them and analyze them and strongly respond to them or speak back to them, all that is going to be for a point. What's the point of doing that? It's to eventually get to this place where here I've grappled with these sources and here's my point of view. Here's my voice on the matter. Okay. Um, for the greater purpose of trying to convince or persuade your reader that you're right, that your point of view is the right one. We're going to be covering these, focusing on these chapters. There are other chapters that'll be useful here. There are plenty of chapters, almost all of them discuss analysis in one way or the other. It's actually kind of frustrating if you ask me. But these ones I thought might be most helpful if we sort of focus on those um, for the analysis and synthesis and persuasive parts or underpinnings of this assignment. These are the chapters on documentation if you want to check them out in the textbook. Trying here to boil all that first page down into something a little more bite-sized. This is not exhaustive. It's not, um, it doesn't account for every little single thing. This is to give you a brief overview. By now, hopefully, you have a very good idea of what these different parts will mean based on our second and third papers we've already done. But at the very least, you should sufficiently identify, contextualize, and present an exigent sociocultural topic. What does this sound like? This sounds like introductory material, right? Specify at least two authors or texts and establish how they relate to your topic as well as one another. Again, this sounds like more introductory material. You're introducing your texts, and I'm strongly hinting you here, try to find sources that don't necessarily agree with each other. You want to be able to compare and contrast. You want to be able to mm, point to differences. These are great ways of developing and expanding analytical thought, critical thinking. You're going to effectively engage with a synthesis question below. We'll talk about that in a moment. By putting forth a corresponding claim or a thesis statement associated with your chosen texts or authors. So this is all so far sort of introductory material. Um, I didn't bother putting a headline because once again, my expectation is that we're familiar with these moves right now. At least we've heard of them before. I want you to summarize, as we've talked about, your sources. And I want you to hear, this is just one, I only have it one point here, number 5, but um, I mean, this could be a bunch of points commingled together. Demonstrate you have carefully considered different perspectives associated with your chosen synthesis question. You're able to articulate your own new response to that question as a result of your analysis and synthesis. And you contribute your new voice, this new voice of yours, to that discourse, to that conversation, all for the sake of convincing and persuading your reader that you're right. I have a note here. Oftentimes, what students do is they'll go through the paper like chunks, summary chunks and body paragraph chunks, and they'll get to this place at the end where they want to do all of their sort of, I don't know, synthesizing in one paragraph, for example, or speaking back. Try your best to do, try your best to put on display these various skills, these various ways of writing throughout your paper. If you're taking one of your sources and you want to talk about one of the rhetorical elements, you can have a paragraph that includes some rhetorical analysis, maybe some speaking back, and maybe some synthesis writing all together. You don't have to put them in different sections all at the same time. In fact, it's a little bit jarring and it's a little bit disjointed. And the reader often has to go back and refresh their memory about what you were saying before to make sense of what you're saying now. So try and do it as you're writing instead of saving, these chunks of writing for later parts of your paper. It's not wrong. I'm not going to necessarily grade you down for doing it. If it's super distracting from in terms of an organizational or a structural strategy, I'll probably have something to say about it, but um, I think y'all can do it. I've seen enough of your writing so far that I think you can intersperse and interweave all these different elements throughout each of your body paragraphs in your paper. And here's just saying the same thing another way. I want to see an introduction, a proper introduction. I want to see some summary work, body paragraphs, plural, many. So like we were doing with the second paper or the third paper, if you're rhetorically analyzing three elements or three rhetorical features from each source, try to at least do that here, maybe more, four or five. Really dig into each of your sources for the rhetoric, for the ideas being presented, or the philosophies or the ideologies. There's a lot of things to analyze in texts. I mean, I really I don't want you to neglect rhetoric, but if you see other things going on in your texts, again, ideologies or philosophies that you really want to take on, um, you're going to find examples, quotes, or descriptions, what have you. Evaluate, analyze, and synthesize in your body paragraphs. And then you're going to have some kind of concluding remarks to include this emergent new voice of yours that has been shaped and developed further and evolved as a result of all your discussion above. All right. Um, it's not lost on me that everything we've been talking about so far is a kind of a lot. I get it. The last thing I wanted to do is make you responsible also for generating an effective synthesis question. These aren't perfect questions. These will at least get you started. Is any question ever perfect? And I have a fail-safe here at the end we'll talk about, but these just give you an idea of what I'm talking about when selecting an important topic or issue to you that's important or critical to society. You can go with one of these and only select one. I'm not asking you to do multiple questions. Select one of these, or you can come up with your own. I can help you do that if you want to. Whether or not you want my help, I'm ultimately going to want to, I don't like using this language, but approve it. The only reason I say that isn't because I want to be some kind of gatekeeper. It has to do with the way that you pose a question, like we're going to be using in this fourth paper. Um, Sometimes you can pose a question that's not going to immediately lend itself to the kind of writing we need to do. Synthesis writing, persuasive writing, that kind of thing. In other words, students a lot of times will come up with a question that leads them down a path of basically writing a 6 or 7 page report. And unfortunately, that kind of paper will not score very well. So I want to make sure you have composed an effective question so that it helps, so that you can respond to it. And that response will spur on or lead to an effective response to the fourth paper prompt. Um, so here we are, given what many people believe are the potential consequences or not of climate change, are there any areas of common ground? That is, areas of possible agreement between proponents and opponents within climate change discourse, upon which a unified way forward might be realized. In other words, when you take a look at climate change and you look at the various points of view surrounding climate change or constituting the climate change discourse. And there are, I know it sometimes it doesn't seem like it, but there are different points of view. For those, if you take those different sides or stances, do you think there's any kind of common ground that could be had based on what sources you find? Maybe you're going to find that, yeah, even though I got these two written texts as opposed to visuals, that both elaborate these lengthy reasons why they think climate change is all bad or climate change is just a big hoax. I have found this one little area where I think people might come to agreement on. That's the sort of approach you want to take to this kind of question. And we'll break these down even more. Believe me, I'm not wanting you to just completely grasp all of this right now, but this is the idea. It's not a straight up what's going on in these sources. It's what's going on in this discourse, and these sources are sort of representative of that. And within that, is there any common ground? Or like this one with economic justice, it seems like a positive thing to many people. Um, However, not everybody agrees, or it is an issue around which swirls much discord. In other words, there's more than one answer to questions like, what would economic justice that is realized look like? Does everybody agree on the answer to that question? Should progress toward economic justice persist? In other words, should we keep on trying for economic justice? Again, there are probably wildly different answers to this question. Would society or culture benefit overall from realizing economic justice? If this is something that resonates with you and you have a point of view, awesome. Find a source that maybe you have some fidelity with, that you have some agreement with, and then find a source that maybe you don't. In fact, find a source that you think to yourself, how could somebody believe that way? Um, those are great sources to write about. You have a lot to say about them, a lot to write about them. But with all that said, in finding different points of view and different stances, um, can any consensus ever happen between these opposing sides? That's the place where I want these are the places in these questions that I want you to get in. I want you to dig in and see if you could offer a response that's persuasive, that's convincing to your reader. That here are these sources, they seem totally at odds with each other. Here's what's going on rhetorically or ideologically. I have something to say about all that. But I've noticed that even with each side, there's this one area that I think might work for both of them. Something like that. I'm not asking you to solve all these problems, by the way. That's not the point of this fourth paper. The point of this fourth paper is for you to carefully and critically think about an important topic, carefully and critically think about some sources related to your topic, and try to think about it in a way that maybe it doesn't have to be so polarizing. Maybe these two different sides could come together. I mean, think about an issue like question number three here with guns. Um, some societal and cultural issues feel overwhelmingly heavy, um, like impossible to remedy. In other words, guns is a topic that's one of those issues. Setting aside the burdensome task of finding a solution to the entire challenge posed by guns, what is one smaller, here I have perhaps less sexy or headline grabbing way, even if it's just a modest, quiet way, what is one smaller way that you could write about in five or six or seven pages um, that both sides can agree on again here? I hope you're noticing that this is the idea. I'm setting these questions up with consensus and collectively and compromise. It's not that it's necessary, but this will help hopefully generate some synthesis discussion. Otherwise, without these kinds of prompts, you're going to really have to take it upon yourself to find ways to put your sources in conversation with each other. And especially if you have two sources that simply agree with each other, that's even more difficult. It's not impossible. It's not even, bad or wrong or anything. It's just the way that I'm showing you to do this, it makes it a little more doable, especially if you're not familiar with this type of writing. That's why we're going the way we are. Um, Last question here is about immigration. Same deal. Um, it's complicated. People believe different things for different reasons. Grab a couple sources that represent some of that. Maybe you find yourself, you don't have to agree with either any of your sources, by the way. Some of these topics have, it's not just black or white. It's not just, us versus them, that kind of thing. There are multiple points of view. It doesn't seem like it, if you pay attention to the media, news and things like that, oftentimes, just one side or the other is reported depending on, what your media outlet is. But if you find that your point of view is a little bit different than the source material that you're finding, that's okay too. Take on both sources that happen to disagree with each other and happen to disagree with you. That's perfectly fine. Students write those papers a lot. Um, if none of this resonates with you, that's cool. I'm not trying to say that you have to write about one of these. Um, Pick out a topic or an issue, take a crack at composing your own sort of synthesis question, maybe get inspired by how these are sort of set up, and run it by me, and I'll give you some notes, and we'll whip it into shape if you'd rather write about something else. And this is just a recap of stuff I've been saying throughout. Okay. Um, I'm going to be paying a lot more attention, as I mentioned, to your documentation, to your how you format your paper in general, and then how you treat your sources. Please be mindful of this. Some of you are still not even putting your names on your papers. So that's going to start getting expensive. So please be mindful of this. Um, so this is not our last paper, but it's sort of our culminating paper. That'll make more sense perhaps in a number of weeks from now. Um, because we do still have one final paper after this, but this is sort of our culminating paper. And because we're expected to put on display all of the skills we've been practicing all semester, it's going to take some more room. So you'll notice here that um, the page lengths, the page requirements are a little bit increased. You know, and this is hard to, just as I've said before, this is hard to put into um, to pin down in words, but just suffice it to say, I've not really seen students pull this paper off in anything fewer than 4 full pages. That's like the bare minimum. Usually students are writing well in the 5 to 7 page range um, in order to make this paper a success. So, um, and then again, if you're going way off 10, 12 pages, you're not going to get marked down for it. It's just I'm also interested in you not doing more work than you need to do. Um, so keep that in mind. Try to aim for this that five. And if you have any images, if you're going to use visuals, of course, none of that's going to count toward this 5 to 7 pages. Any works cited or references pages, that's not counting to this either. So um, we're just talking about written work. And here's our due date. And I think that's really all I've got to say about this. We'll be coming back to this prompt over the next couple of weeks. So don't feel like once again you need to know it all right now. I just wanted to sort of introduce it to you and let you know what's going to be happening. So let me know if you have any questions or concerns.